The whispers began before Lady Eleanor Whitmore even stepped out of her carriage. "They've found another one. Poor thing. She looks too innocent. I give her until sunrise." The voices drifted across the grand marble staircase of St. Augustine Cathedral, carried on the crisp autumn wind. Noblewomen hid amused smiles behind lace fans while gentlemen pretended not to listen. No one bothered lowering their voices. After all, the bride would never return to hear them again. Eleanor adjusted the sleeves of her ivory gown, refusing to let trembling fingers betray her. The dress wasn't new. It had belonged to her mother 23 years earlier, carefully altered to fit her slimmer frame. Tiny pearls lined the neckline, and a delicate veil rested over her chestnut hair. She looked every bit the Duchess England expected. Except she wasn't marrying for love. She was marrying to save her family. 3 weeks earlier, creditors had arrived at Whitmore Hall with legal notices demanding immediate payment of debts her late father had hidden for years. The estate would be seized. Her younger twin brothers would lose everything. Her widowed mother would be turned from the only home she had ever known. Then came the Duke's proposal. No courtship, no romance, no flowers, just a contract. Marry Duke Alexander Ravenshade. In return, every Whitmore debt would disappear before sunset. It was a bargain no daughter could refuse. Even if it meant marrying the most feared nobleman in England. Everyone knew the stories. Alexander Ravenshade had inherited his title at 26 after losing both parents in a tragic carriage accident. He was now 32. Powerful, exceptionally wealthy, devastatingly handsome, and completely alone. He attended Parliament, managed hundreds of tenants, donated quietly to orphanages, never smiled, never danced, never lingered in conversation. Yet it wasn't his silence that frightened society. It was his marriages. 3 brides, 3 wedding nights, 3 women who left Ravenshade Manor before dawn. None would explain why. One entered a convent. One sailed to France. One locked herself inside her father's estate and refused every proposal thereafter. Whenever anyone asked what had happened, they simply whispered, "I cannot tell you," and burst into tears. Naturally, rumors multiplied. Some claimed the Duke was cursed. Others insisted he became violent after midnight. A few believed he practiced forbidden rituals hidden deep beneath Ravenshade Manor. No evidence had ever surfaced. But fear rarely required evidence. It only required repetition. Inside the cathedral, sunlight spilled through towering stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in shades of sapphire and crimson. The organ began to play. Every noble head turned. At the altar stood Duke Alexander. Broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in black formal attire embroidered with silver thread. His dark hair was neatly combed. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that unsettled people. Steel gray. Not cruel. Simply distant. Like someone who had spent years watching storms from behind locked windows. When Eleanor reached him, she curtsied gracefully. "Your Grace." His voice was calm. "Lady Eleanor." No smile. No warmth. No hostility either. Only restraint. The Archbishop conducted the ceremony with practiced solemnity. Within 12 minutes, they were husband and wife. The applause sounded strangely uncertain, as though everyone present expected to attend another wedding before long. The journey to Ravenshade Manor lasted nearly 4 hours. Neither spoke much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, simply existed. Finally Eleanor glanced toward him. "May I ask something?" "You may. Why did you choose me?" He continued watching the countryside pass beyond the carriage window. "Because your family needed saving." She frowned. "That cannot be the only reason." "No." Another silence. "It is the only answer I can give today." She studied him. Most powerful men enjoyed making women feel small. This one looked exhausted. Ravenshade Manor rose from the hills like something carved from moonlight. Towering stone walls, ancient oak trees, hundreds of glowing windows. It should have felt welcoming. It felt lonely. The servants greeted their new duchess politely, though several exchanged discreet glances. Not pity. Oh. As though they desperately wished history would change. Mrs. Hawthorne, the elderly housekeeper, led Eleanor upstairs. Your Grace, your chambers. The room was magnificent. Silk curtains, fresh roses, a roaring fireplace. Books lined every wall. Everything a duchess could desire. The adjoining door connecting her chamber to the Duke's remained firmly closed. Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated before leaving. If you require anything tonight. She stopped herself, then offered a gentle smile. I shall be awake. The words lingered strangely after she departed. By 10:30, Eleanor had changed into a simple white nightgown. She waited. 11 o'clock. Nothing. Midnight. Still nothing. The stories returned. Perhaps this was when everything changed. Perhaps this was when terror began. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Alexander entered quietly. Without ceremony. Without expectation. He carried 2 cups of tea. Not wine. He placed one before her. I thought you might prefer chamomile. She blinked. You remembered. You mentioned it during the carriage ride. She hadn't realized he'd been listening. Neither touched the tea immediately. Finally he spoke. There is something I must explain. She nodded. This marriage exists because circumstances demanded it. I understand. I will fulfill every legal responsibility expected of a husband. Another pause. But there is one thing I will never demand. She waited. You will never share my bed unless you ask me to. For several seconds, she simply stared. I'm sorry. I don't understand. You needn't. His voice remained calm. You are free to occupy these rooms entirely. You owe me nothing beyond courtesy. She searched his face. No deception. No hidden amusement. Only sincerity. But everyone says. I know what everyone says. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. They always do. The fire crackled gently. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. Eleanor gathered enough courage to ask the question haunting every corner of England. What happened to your previous wives? Alexander remained silent for a long time, then answered. I told them exactly what I have told you tonight. And they left. Why? Because they desired a husband. He looked directly into her eyes. I could only offer protection. His honesty struck her harder than any lie could have. No dramatic confession. No mysterious curse. Only unbearable loneliness. Hours passed. Instead of retiring, they talked about books, travel, music, her brothers, his horses, the villages surrounding the estate. She discovered he possessed an unexpectedly dry sense of humor. Twice she laughed. The second time, the corner of his mouth almost lifted. Almost. By 2 a.m, exhaustion finally claimed her. She intended only to rest her eyes for a moment. Sitting comfortably beside the fireplace, wrapped in the warmth of the flickering flames, listening to his quiet voice describing constellations, her eyelids became impossibly heavy. I'm afraid I may. She never finished the sentence. Her head gently tipped sideways, against his shoulder. Then everything went still. Alexander froze. He scarcely breathed. No woman had ever voluntarily remained close to him after learning the truth. Not one. Carefully, very carefully, he looked down. She wasn't pretending. She was asleep. Completely, peacefully, trustingly. His heart tightened with an unfamiliar ache. Slowly he lifted the blanket from the nearby chair and draped it over her shoulders. She stirred slightly. Instead of moving away, she instinctively nestled closer, as though his shoulder were the safest place in the world. Alexander closed his eyes. He had forgotten what it felt like to be trusted. The grandfather clock struck 4. He should wake her. He should leave. Does it? He remained perfectly still, not wanting to disturb the peaceful expression on her face. Hours slipped quietly by. The fire burned lower. Rain faded into silence. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky. A gentle knock sounded. Mrs. Hawthorne entered carrying breakfast. She stopped immediately. Her eyes widened. The tray nearly slipped from her hands. There they were. The Duke still seated before the dying fire. The Duchess asleep with her head resting against his shoulder. Neither had noticed the sunrise. Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes filled with tears. For 6 years she had watched 3 frightened brides flee this house before dawn. For 6 years she had watched her lonely master return to silence. But this morning, everything was different. Alexander looked up. Their eyes met. Without speaking, the housekeeper understood. History had finally changed. And somewhere deep inside Ravenshade Manor, a frozen heart had felt the first warmth of spring. By breakfast the entire household knew. Not because anyone had spoken. Because servants had a remarkable gift for discovering truths without hearing a single word. The Duke's new bride had not left. She had not cried. She had not demanded her carriage. Instead, she had fallen asleep beside him. Mrs. Hawthorne had spent 30 years serving Ravenshade Manor. She had watched little Alexander chase butterflies through the gardens before tragedy stole his childhood. She had watched him become Duke long before he was ready. She had watched grief build walls around his heart until even laughter seemed like a foreign language. Now, for the first time in years, she had seen peace on his face. Only for a moment, but it had been there. That alone was enough to make the old housekeeper whisper a prayer of gratitude before beginning the day's work. By noon, the news had already reached London. Lady Eleanor Ravenshade was still at the manor. The whispers changed overnight. It won't last. Give her another day. Perhaps she's too frightened to leave. One woman, however, remained unusually quiet. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, the widowed Marchioness of Ashcombe. Elegant, beautiful, brilliant, dangerous. For nearly 5 years, society had assumed she would eventually become Duchess of Ravenshade. Not because Alexander courted her. Because she had never stopped pursuing him. She understood influence, power, titles. Marriage to the Duke would place her among the most powerful women in England. Then a forgotten baron's daughter had appeared, and taken everything. Beatrice smiled as she folded the newspaper. Interesting. Her secretary looked up. My lady, it seems our little Duchess survived. She rose gracefully. That simply means I must work harder. Life at Ravenshade Manor settled into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Alexander rode across the estate before sunrise. Each afternoon, Eleanor visited tenant families. She listened. She remembered names. She noticed leaking roofs, broken wells, hungry children. When she returned each evening, she quietly organized repairs using money from the household accounts. She never asked permission. She simply solved problems. One evening, Alexander discovered several invoices on his desk. New roofs, school supplies, medicine. He frowned. Who authorized these? Mr. Fletcher, the estate steward, smiled nervously. Her Grace. And the budget. She reduced unnecessary banquet expenses. He blinked. She what? She discovered we were spending enough on monthly dinners to repair 3 cottages. Silence. Finley. Alexander laughed. Just once. Short, quiet laugh. Mr. Fletcher nearly dropped his ledger. He had served the Duke for 12 years. He had never heard that sound. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor wandered into the West Wing, the oldest part of Ravenshade Manor. Unlike the rest of the house, these corridors felt untouched. Dust rested upon portraits. Curtains remained closed. Silence hung heavily in the air. At the end of the hallway stood one locked door. Its brass handle gleamed despite the dust surrounding it. Curious, she reached toward it. "Don't." Alexander's voice echoed behind her. He turned. He looked unusually tense. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have wandered. You've done nothing wrong." His gaze lingered on the door. "That room belonged to my parents." Understanding softened her expression. "You've never opened it." "Not since the accident." 20 years. The realization struck her deeply. No wonder grief still ruled this house. No one had ever allowed it to breathe. That evening they shared tea before the fire. Neither mentioned the locked room. Instead, Eleanor quietly asked, "May I tell you something?" He nodded. "When my father died, I couldn't enter his study for almost 2 years." Alexander looked at her. She continued, "I believed keeping everything exactly the same meant I was honoring him." She smiled sadly. "But I eventually realized I wasn't preserving his memory. I was preserving my pain." The fire crackled. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Alexander stared into the flames for a very long time. "I've never told anyone what happened that night." "You don't have to." "I want to." His voice became softer than she had ever heard. "My parents were returning from Parliament. I insisted on accompanying them." He paused. "My mother refused. She wanted me to remain home because I had a fever." His jaw tightened. The carriage overturned crossing Raven Bridge. No one survived. Silence settled between them. "I spent years believing if I had gone, I could have changed something. You were a child. I know that now." He looked toward the fire. "But children don't understand reason. They only understand guilt." Without thinking, Eleanor reached across the table. She placed her hand gently over his. He didn't move away. "Is it?" His fingers slowly closed around hers. Neither spoke. Sometimes, silence carried more comfort than words ever could. Days became weeks. The estate changed. Flowers appeared in forgotten gardens. Children laughed outside the manor again. Music returned to the ballroom after nearly a decade. Servants smiled more often. Even Alexander began arriving home before sunset. Not because duty required it, because someone waited for him. One evening, Eleanor was reading in the library when he entered carrying a small wooden box. "I found this." She opened it carefully. Inside lay dozens of wildflower seeds. "My mother collected them." He looked embarrassed. "I thought, perhaps, you'd know what to do with them." Her eyes shone. The following morning, they planted every single seed together. Lady Beatrice watched all of this with growing irritation. The Duke smiled now. He attended village festivals. He walked through gardens. He laughed with children. All because of Eleanor. That simply would not do. She summoned a private investigator. "I want everything on the Duchess. If there is the smallest flaw, I'll find it." Within 2 weeks, the opportunity arrived. Forged letter. It claimed Eleanor had secretly promised marriage to another gentleman before wedding the Duke. Complete nonsense. But scandal required very little truth. Only convincing ink. The letter spread rapidly through London's highest circles. By week's end, even Parliament whispered about it. Alexander received the document during breakfast. He read every line, folded it calmly, then tossed it into the fireplace. Eleanor looked up. "You didn't ask whether it was true." He met her eyes. "I already know." "You do. You've never lied to me." She felt tears threaten. "You trust me." "I do." His answer came without hesitation. The forged letter became ash. So did every doubt between them. 3 nights later, Lady Beatrice appeared unexpectedly at Ravenshade Manor. She entered with practiced elegance. "I wished to congratulate the Duchess personally." Alexander remained politely distant. Tea was served. Conversation flowed. Finally Beatrice smiled sweetly. I imagine your grace has finally accepted the responsibilities of marriage. The room grew still. Eleanor understood exactly what she meant. Alexander answered before anyone else could. My marriage has always been my responsibility. Beatrice's smile faltered. I merely meant. I know precisely what you meant. His voice remained calm. But you misunderstand one thing. He looked toward Eleanor. My wife has never asked me to become someone else. She simply reminded me who I already was. The silence became unbearable. Beatrice realized. She had already lost. Winter arrived early. Snow blanketed Ravenshade Manor. The wildflower garden slept beneath frost. One evening, Eleanor discovered Alexander standing outside the locked west wing door. He held the old brass key. I think, he whispered. I'm ready. Together, they entered. Dust covered every surface. Family portraits remained exactly where they had been left 20 years earlier. A music box rested upon the fireplace. His mother's shawl still hung over a chair. Nothing had changed. Alexander slowly walked through the room. He smiled sadly at forgotten memories, then looked toward Eleanor. Would you help me? With what? Opening the windows. Fresh winter air filled the room. For the first time in decades, light entered, not to erase the past, but to remind it. Life continued. Spring returned. The wildflowers bloomed. Hundreds of them. Blue, yellow, purple. Exactly as the late Duchess had once imagined. The villagers gathered for the annual spring festival. Children raced through the gardens. Music filled the air. Alexander stood beside Eleanor beneath the blooming trees. I owe you something. She smiled. You owe me nothing. I do. He took both her hands. When you arrived, I believed I was rescuing your family. His voice grew quieter. I never imagined you would rescue me. She laughed softly. I didn't. You simply remembered how to live. He looked at her with complete honesty. No, you taught me. For the first time since their wedding, he kissed her. Not because duty demanded it. Not because society expected it. But because love had quietly grown between shared conversations, silent evenings, planted gardens, repaired cottages, and two lonely hearts learning to trust again. The villagers erupted into applause. Mrs. Hawthorne wiped tears from her cheeks. Mr. Fletcher pretended to adjust his spectacles. Even the stern village pastor smiled. Years later, visitors still spoke of Ravenshade Manor. Not because of its wealth. Not because of its powerful duke. But because of its warmth. People no longer whispered. No bride survives the duke's first night. Instead, parents told their daughters another story. They spoke of a young woman who walked into a lonely house carrying nothing but kindness. Of a duke whose heart had frozen beneath years of grief. And of the quiet miracle that changed them both. Because love is rarely loud. It does not always arrive with grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it begins with a cup of chamomile tea, conversation beside a fire, and a tired young bride who accidentally falls asleep on the shoulder of a lonely man. Everyone expected her to disappear before dawn. She stayed. And in staying, she accomplished what no title, fortune, or power ever could. She melted the duke's frozen heart.